Alicia Johnson walked into the federal courthouse like a shadow among a sea of bright suits. She wanted only one thing: justice for her brother, wrongfully convicted and caged behind steel bars. But instead of being heard, she was cut off, humiliated publicly by Judge Peterson, his voice booming through the marble halls. "A black woman like you doesn't understand the law." Laughter rippled across the courtroom like poison spreading through water. Alicia bit down hard on her lip, standing silent, her eyes burning with a fire no one could see. Not a single person in that room knew that in the very moment she was being degraded, she had noticed something terrible. The case files had been altered, and the signature approving those changes belonged to Peterson himself. This story was no longer about justice for her brother. It had become a war between one woman and an entire rotten system. A woman publicly shamed would soon make the whole courthouse tremble before the truth. "You silenced me in your courtroom," she would tell Peterson in the final hearing, her voice steady as iron. "But you forgot I record everything." When the evidence reached the FBI, everything exploded. A woman crushed under the heel of power had become a symbol of what justice truly meant. The federal courthouse in downtown Washington smelled like old wood and broken promises. Alicia had prepared for 3 weeks, every night after her son Marcus went to bed, every morning before dawn broke over the Potomac. She knew the law inside and out. She had practiced her opening statement until the words felt like breathing. Her brother David sat in a prison cell 200 miles away, convicted on evidence that had never made sense. The timeline was wrong. The witness statements contradicted each other. But the court had moved forward anyway, and now David was serving 15 years for a crime Alicia knew he did not commit. She stood before Judge Peterson, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. 40 years on the bench, respected, feared, untouchable. "Your Honor," Alicia began, her voice clear and professional. "The defense would like to present new evidence that directly contradicts Miss Johnson." Peterson's interruption was sharp as broken glass. "This court has already reviewed the evidence. We don't need another round of your theories." The word theories dripped with contempt. Alicia felt her stomach tighten but pressed forward. "Your Honor, with respect, this evidence was not available during the original trial. It shows that you don't know when to accept a verdict." Peterson leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You walk in here with your homemade briefs and your righteous indignation, thinking you can overturn a jury decision because you feel it's unfair. That's not how the law works, Miss Johnson. Maybe if you'd gone to a real law school instead of whatever night program gave you that degree, you'd understand that." The courtroom erupted in scattered laughter. Alicia felt heat rush to her face. She had graduated top of her class. She had clerked for a federal judge. But none of that mattered in this moment. "Your Honor, I graduated from Georgetown. I don't care if you graduated from Harvard." Peterson's voice rose, filling every corner of the room. "A black woman like you doesn't understand the law. You understand emotion. You understand drama. But you don't understand that this court operates on precedent, on procedure, on rules that have existed long before you decided to play lawyer." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Alicia's hands trembled, but she kept them flat against the defense table. Behind her, she could hear whispers, the rustle of reporters' notebooks, the click of a courtroom sketch artist's pencil. From the gallery, her 15-year-old son Marcus watched his mother being destroyed on live television. The local news had sent cameras. By evening, the clip would be everywhere. By morning, her reputation would be ashes. "The motion is denied." Peterson's gavel came down like a guillotine. "And Miss Johnson, consider yourself warned. This court has no patience for frivolous appeals or theatrics. Next time you waste this court's time, there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" Alicia's throat felt like sandpaper. "Yes, Your Honor." She gathered her papers with shaking hands, stuffed them into her briefcase, and walked out of that courtroom with her head high and her heart in pieces. The aftermath came fast and brutal. By the next morning, Alicia's phone was ringing nonstop. Colleagues who had smiled at her in the hallways now looked away. The State Bar Association opened an inquiry into her professional conduct. A senior partner at her firm called her into his office and suggested, in careful legal language, that perhaps she should take a leave of absence. David called from prison, his voice breaking. "Sis, I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have to go through this because of me." "Don't apologize," Alicia said, sitting alone in her car in the courthouse parking garage. "None of this is your fault." But she felt like she was drowning. Her career was crumbling. Her son had watched her humiliation broadcast across the city. And her brother was still behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, going through the case files one more time, searching for something, anything she might have missed. And that's when she saw it. The signature on the amended evidence log didn't match the original. The handwriting was similar but not identical. Someone had altered the document after the fact, changing the dates certain evidence had been collected. And the signature authorizing that change belonged to Judge Peterson himself. Alicia's hands went cold. She pulled up the digital scans from the court record system and compared them to the physical copies she had obtained through discovery. They didn't match. Someone had changed the files after they'd been scanned into the system. Her colleague Linda found her still at the table at 6 in the morning, papers spread everywhere. "Ali, you look like hell." "Linda, look at this." Alicia showed her the discrepancies. "This signature is forged. And look at the date stamp. This amendment was made 3 days after the jury verdict." Linda studied the documents, her expression darkening. "Ali, you need to be very careful here. If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm showing you what's in front of us. Judge Peterson has been on the bench for 4 decades. He has friends everywhere. If you go after him and you're wrong, your career is over. And if you go after him and you're right." Linda trailed off, but her meaning was clear. "Then what? I just let David rot in prison? I just accept what happened in that courtroom?" Linda put a hand on her shoulder. "I'm saying be smart about this. Don't go rushing in. And for God's sake, don't do this alone." But Alicia was already planning her next move. She would go to the court archives. She would pull every case Peterson had presided over in the last 5 years. She would find out if this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. The federal courthouse archives occupied an entire basement level, a labyrinth of filing cabinets and bankers' boxes lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed like angry wasps. Alicia signed in under the pretense of researching case law for a current client. The clerk barely looked at her. She started with cases similar to David's. Criminal trials where the defendant had been convicted despite questionable evidence. It took her 6 hours to find the first one, a drug trafficking case from 3 years ago. The defendant, a young Hispanic man named Carlos Rodriguez, had been convicted based on evidence that appeared in the record after the trial had begun. The signature authorizing the late addition? Judge Peterson's. Alicia's pulse quickened. She kept digging. By the end of the week, she had found 3 more cases. All criminal trials. All convictions. All involving evidence that had been added or modified after the fact. And all bearing Peterson's signature in slightly different handwriting each time. She copied everything onto a USB drive, making sure to photograph the original documents with her phone as backup. As she was leaving the archives, one of the security guards, an older black man named Walter, stopped her. "You've been down here a lot this week, Miss Johnson." "Just doing research." Walter glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I've worked here 23 years. I see things. I notice patterns. And I notice when people start asking questions about certain judges." He paused. "They're watching you. Be careful." The warning sent ice down Alicia's spine. But she was too deep now to stop. The email arrived at 2 in the morning, jolting her awake with its notification chime. The subject line was blank. The sender was a string of random numbers and letters. The message contained only 6 words. "Drop it or lose everything." Alicia's hands shook as she read it again. She checked her security cameras. Nothing unusual. But the fear that had been simmering in her gut since Walter's warning now bloomed into full panic. The next morning, she walked out to find her car windshield shattered, a brick sitting on the driver's seat among a glitter of broken glass. No note. No witnesses. Just a message written in destruction. Then Marcus came home from school, pale and shaken. "Mom, there was a guy following me today. Black SUV. He followed me for 6 blocks before I ran into the convenience store and called Aunt Linda." Alicia felt something break inside her. They were threatening her son. Her 15-year-old son who had already watched his uncle go to prison and his mother be humiliated on television. She sat down at her kitchen table that night, the USB drive in front of her, and seriously considered giving up. Walking away. Protecting her son, and salvaging what was left of her career. But then David called. "Sis, I heard about your car. Linda told me." His voice was thick with worry. "You need to stop this. I can do the time. I'll be okay." "David. No, listen to me. You're all Marcus has. Don't risk everything for me. You didn't do what they said you did. I know. But sometimes the truth doesn't matter. Sometimes survival is more important." Alicia closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. You told me once that I was the only person who still believed in justice. Do you remember that? Silence on the other end of the line. I'm not going to let them win, she said. Not this time. After she hung up, Alicia made a decision. If she was going to do this, she needed help. Real help. She needed someone who could actually do something with the evidence she'd gathered. She needed the FBI. Agent Thomas Morales worked out of the FBI's Washington field office in a cramped cubicle that smelled like bad coffee and old files. He specialized in public corruption cases, the kind that took years to build and often ended in frustration when witnesses recanted or evidence disappeared. When Alicia Johnson called requesting a meeting, he almost declined. Citizens called all the time with conspiracy theories about judges and politicians. 99% of it was paranoia or misunderstanding. But something in her voice made him agree to meet her at a coffee shop near Union Station. She brought everything. The forged signatures. The timeline discrepancies. The pattern across multiple cases. She laid it out like a prosecutor building a case, methodical and precise. Morales listened, his expression neutral. When she finished, he sat back and studied her. Miss Johnson, do you understand what you're alleging here? I'm not alleging anything. I'm showing you documentary evidence of fraud. You're accusing a federal judge of tampering with evidence in multiple criminal trials. Do you know how serious that is? I know exactly how serious it is. That's why I'm here. Morales picked up one of the documents, examining the signature. He had worked fraud cases for 12 years. He knew what forged documents looked like. And this? This looked real. Why bring this to me? He asked. Why not go to the press? Why not file a complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board? Because I've already been humiliated once in that courthouse. Because my car's been vandalized and my son's been followed. Because I need someone who can actually investigate this without getting crushed by the system. She met his eyes. I did my research on you, Agent Morales. You brought down a state senator last year. You don't back down from powerful people. Morales was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and took photos of every document she'd brought. I'm not promising anything, he said. But I'll look into it. Quietly. If there's something here, we'll need more than forged signatures. We'll need to know why. Who benefited from these convictions? Was Peterson being paid? Was he being blackmailed? We need the whole picture. Tell me what you need. Access to Peterson's financial records would be ideal, but we can't get those without probable cause. What we can do is build a pattern. I'll pull the court records through official channels, see if there are more cases. He paused. You need to be very careful. If Peterson, or whoever's working with him realizes you're still digging, they won't stop at threatening you. Over the next 3 weeks, Alicia and Morales worked in secret. She would identify suspicious cases. He would investigate the backgrounds of the defendants, looking for connections. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. All of the defendants, whose cases had been tampered with, had been charged with crimes that somehow interfered with development projects in certain neighborhoods. A young man convicted of drug dealing on a block slated for gentrification. A woman convicted of assault who had been protesting the demolition of low-income housing. David, convicted of vandalism against a construction site that was displacing families. It's about real estate, Morales said one evening, spreading photos across the table in the secure room where they'd been meeting. Someone's been using the courts to clear out people who were in the way of development projects. But who? Who has that kind of power? Morales pulled up a corporate filing on his laptop. Greystone Development Corporation. They've been behind every major construction project in the areas where your defendants were arrested. And look at their board of directors. Alicia leaned in and felt her blood run cold. Among the names was Thomas Peterson Jr., the judge's son. We need to get into Peterson's office, Alicia said. There has to be more evidence there. Financial records. Communications with Greystone. Absolutely not. That's breaking and entering. It would poison any case we might build. Then what do we do? Wait for him to destroy evidence? Wait for more innocent people to go to prison? Morales rubbed his face, exhausted. Let me see what I can do through official channels. I'll request a warrant. But Alicia already knew what she had to do. The courthouse was nearly empty at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Alicia had learned the security patterns over weeks of late-night research sessions. She knew Walter worked the weekend overnight shift. She knew the cameras on the third floor had blind spots. She knew that Peterson's chambers were accessible through a service corridor that maintenance used. She also knew this was insane. Illegal. Career-ending if she got caught. But she thought of David in his cell. Of Marcus watching his mother be destroyed. Of all the other families torn apart by Peterson's corruption, she wore dark clothes and kept her head down. The service corridor was exactly where Linda had told her it would be. Linda, who had ultimately decided that some things mattered more than safety. Linda, who was waiting outside in her car, ready to create a distraction if needed. Peterson's office was exactly what she expected. Dark wood. Leather chairs. Walls lined with legal volumes and photographs of the judge shaking hands with senators and governors. Alicia went straight for the computer, her hands shaking as she inserted a USB drive loaded with software Morales had reluctantly provided. It would copy the entire hard drive in 12 minutes. While it worked, she searched the desk drawers. Most were locked, but one wasn't. Inside, she found a smaller USB drive labeled only with the number 1998. 10 minutes had passed. She pocketed the USB drive and checked the computer. Still copying. That's when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Alicia's heart stopped. The footsteps were getting closer. She yanked the USB drive from the computer and dove under the desk just as the door opened. "I don't care what time it is," Peterson's voice boomed into the phone. "Tell them the deal is off unless they increase the payment. I'm not risking my career for scraps." He was silent, listening to whoever was on the other end. "The Johnson woman is handled. She's been discredited. No one will believe anything she says now." A pause. "No, I don't think she'll be a problem going forward. She's too smart to keep pushing." Alicia barely breathed, pressed against the back panel of the desk, praying he wouldn't sit down. "Fine. Monday morning. But I want cash this time. No more wire transfers." He hung up. She heard him moving around the office, opening a drawer, the clink of glass on glass. Was he pouring a drink? Then her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Linda. "Security guard heading your way. Get out now." But Peterson was still in the room. If she moved, he'd see her. The door opened again. "Judge Peterson?" It was Walter's voice. "Sir, I didn't know you were here. I saw the light and wanted to check. I'm just finishing up some work, Walter. Is there a problem?" "No, sir. Just being thorough. Have a good night, sir." "You too." Walter's footsteps retreated. But something in his voice had been off. Alicia wondered if he'd known she was there. If he'd been giving her a warning. Peterson stayed another agonizing 3 minutes, then finally left, switching off the light as he went. Alicia waited in the darkness, counting to 100, then 200. Finally, she crawled out from under the desk, her legs cramping, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She made it to the service corridor, down the stairs, and out the side exit where Linda was waiting. "Drive," Alicia gasped, falling into the passenger seat. They were 6 blocks away when Linda finally spoke. "Did you get anything?" Alicia held up the USB drive. "I got everything." But their victory was short-lived. As they pulled up to Linda's apartment, 2 men stepped out of the shadows. One grabbed Linda's door. The other circled around to Alicia's side. Out of the car. Now. They weren't police. No badges. No uniforms. Just dark suits and empty eyes. Linda made a split-second decision. She gunned the engine, jerking the car forward. The man at her door lost his grip and fell. But the other one grabbed Alicia's door handle, trying to force it open. "Go!" Alicia screamed. Linda took a hard turn. Alicia heard something crack, the side mirror ripping off against the second man. He stumbled back, and Linda accelerated, running a red light and racing through the empty streets. "Are you okay?" Alicia asked. "I think I twisted my wrist." Linda's face was pale but determined. "But we're alive." They abandoned Linda's car in a grocery store parking lot and took an Uber to Morales' apartment. He opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, took one look at their faces, and let them in without a word. "We need to know what's on this," Alicia said, handing him the USB drive. Morales plugged it into his laptop, and for the next 2 hours, they watched the truth unfold. Video files. Audio recordings. Spreadsheets tracking payments. Everything Peterson had been too arrogant or too careless to destroy. There were recordings of him meeting with Greystone executives. Videos of him accepting cash in his chambers. A spreadsheet listing defendants whose cases he'd manipulated and the corresponding payment amounts. Dozens of cases. Millions of dollars. "This is enough," Morales whispered. "This is more than enough." But the next morning brought disaster. Morales' supervisor called him in for a meeting. Someone had tipped off the FBI brass that he was running an unauthorized investigation into a federal judge. He was suspended pending an internal review. And Alicia got a visit from federal marshals at her apartment. She was being charged with breaking and entering, theft of federal property, and tampering with a judicial investigation. They took her into custody in front of Marcus, who stood frozen in the doorway of his bedroom, watching his mother being handcuffed for the second time in his life. The first had been during a protest when he was 6. "Mom. It's okay, baby. Call Aunt Linda. Tell her." But the marshal cut her off, guiding her toward the door. In the holding cell, Alicia had time to think. They were going to bury her. Peterson had connections everywhere. The evidence on the USB drive would be dismissed as fabricated or obtained illegally. Morales was suspended. Linda was in hiding. It was over. But when they brought her to the visitation room for processing, Marcus was there. They had exactly 3 minutes. "Mom, what do I do?" Alicia looked at her son, this beautiful, brave child who had already seen too much ugliness in the world. She reached into her sock, where she'd hidden the USB drive, and passed it to him through the narrow slot in the partition. "Take this to Agent Morales. Tell him to go over everyone's head. Tell him to take it to the director if he has to." "And Marcus?" Her voice broke. "Tell him I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not being able to protect you from all this." Marcus pressed his palm against the glass. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom. Don't apologize for fighting." They took her back to the cell. She didn't know if Marcus would make it to Morales. She didn't know if Morales would risk his career by going forward. She didn't know if any of this would matter. All she knew was that she had done everything she could. Marcus found Morales at a diner, hunched over cold coffee, and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "She gave me this," Marcus said, sliding the USB drive across the table. "She said to go over everyone's head if you have to." Morales looked at the drive, then at the kid. 15 years old and already carrying the weight of the world. Just like his mother. He made a decision. He called a friend at the Department of Justice, someone he'd worked with years ago who now worked directly under the Deputy Attorney General. He explained everything. The forged signatures. The real estate scheme. The recordings on the USB drive. "If I send you this, will you look at it? Will you actually look at it?" There was a long pause. "Send it to my personal email. Not the official one." Morales and Marcus spent the next 6 hours going through the files again, organizing them, creating a timeline, building a narrative that was impossible to ignore. They sent everything at midnight. By morning, the Deputy Attorney General had opened a formal investigation. By noon, agents were executing search warrants at Peterson's home, his chambers, and the offices of Greystone Development. By evening, Peterson was in custody. The news spread like wildfire. A federal judge arrested for corruption. Evidence of a years-long scheme to manipulate criminal cases for financial gain. The FBI crediting an anonymous whistleblower they didn't name Alicia, not yet with bringing the case to light. Alicia was released the next day, all charges dropped. She walked out of that detention center into a crowd of reporters and cameras, but this time the story was different. This time, she wasn't the villain. "Miss Johnson, how does it feel to know you brought down a corrupt judge? Will you be seeking compensation for your wrongful arrest? What's next for you?" She said nothing, just got into Linda's car, and went home to her son. The preliminary hearing was held 3 weeks later in the same courtroom where Alicia had been humiliated. But this time, she wasn't the one on trial. Judge Peterson sat at the defense table, his expensive suit looking rumpled, his legendary composure shattered. Alicia sat in the gallery, Marcus on one side and Linda on the other. When she was called as a witness, she walked to the stand with her head high. The prosecutor led her through her testimony. The discovery of the forged signatures. The pattern of corruption. The theft of the USB drive that had contained the smoking gun. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. "Miss Johnson, isn't it true that you broke into Judge Peterson's office?" "Yes." "Isn't it true that you stole property belonging to a federal official?" "I retrieved evidence of criminal activity." "Isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta against my client because he ruled against you in your brother's case?" Alicia looked directly at Peterson. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Your client told me I didn't understand the law because I'm a black woman. He humiliated me in open court. He manipulated evidence to send my brother to prison as part of a scheme to make money from real estate development." She paused. "So yes, I suppose you could say this is personal. Justice tends to be personal when it's your family in a cage." The courtroom erupted. The judge, a different judge, brought in from another district called for order. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The prosecution played the video from Peterson's USB drive. The courtroom watched in silence as a federal judge accepted cash from a corporate executive. As he laughed about manipulating evidence. As he casually discussed destroying lives for profit. When the video ended, The silence was deafening. Peterson's lawyer asked for a recess. The judge denied it. Does the defense have any further questions for this witness? No, Your Honor. As Alicia stepped down from the stand, she paused next to Peterson's table. He finally looked up at her. You silenced me in your courtroom, she said quietly, only loud enough for him to hear. But you forgot I record everything too. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Peterson was convicted on 19 counts of corruption, fraud, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Greystone Development was dissolved. Its executives faced their own trials. And David Johnson walked out of prison on a cold November morning, his conviction overturned, his record expunged. Alicia was waiting for him with Marcus. When David saw them, he ran, and they met in the middle of the parking lot, holding each other and crying. I knew you'd do it, sis, David said. I always knew. 3 months later, the FBI held a small ceremony at their headquarters. They presented Alicia with a civilian commendation for her assistance in exposing judicial corruption. Agent Morales, reinstated with a promotion, made the presentation. Miss Johnson demonstrated extraordinary courage in the face of intimidation and institutional resistance, he said. She risked everything to expose corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Because of her, 7 innocent people have been exonerated, and a corrupt judge has been brought to justice. The applause was genuine. Even the hardened agents who had seen everything looked impressed. Later, Alicia stood at a window overlooking the city, Marcus beside her. How do you feel, Mom? She thought about the question. About the humiliation in the courtroom. About the threats and the fear. About the nights she'd spent wondering if she was putting her son in danger. About Linda, recovering from her injuries. About Morales, who had risked his career to believe her. I feel like maybe the system can work, she said finally. When people are brave enough to fight for it. Are you going back to practicing law? I don't know. Part of me wants to walk away from all of it. But part of me thinks about all the other Davids out there. All the other people trapped by a system that's supposed to protect them. Marcus nodded. He was 16 now, older than his years, shaped by everything he'd witnessed. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. Alicia put her arm around her son. Through the window, she could see the dome of the Capitol building, the monuments, the marble facades of power. For so long, those buildings had felt like fortresses keeping people like her out. But now she saw them differently. They were just buildings. And buildings could be changed. They took my reputation, she said softly. They tried to take my career, my freedom, my son's safety. But they couldn't take the truth. They couldn't take what I knew was right. The sun was setting over Washington, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in a federal prison, Peterson was beginning his sentence. Somewhere across the city, 7 families were being reunited with loved ones who had been wrongfully convicted. And in this moment, standing with her son and looking out over the city, Alicia Johnson finally felt like justice was more than just a word. It was a promise. One that she intended to keep.